U.S. victory at Iwo Jima cost the highest casualty rate in Marine Corps history for a single battle. On their strategic advance towards Okinawa and the Japanese mainland, the island was desired for its airfield and tactical advantage. Though even military figures expressed doubt about the island deployment against an army infamous for suicide before surrender. Iwo Jima's legacy remains, despite the blood-spilled and roaring human cost. But why? Welcome to History on Fleek. Today we examine the deadliest battle of the Pacific, the Battle of Iwo Jima. Following the 1942 Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, America went from being reluctant to join the war effort to being directly engaged. Ironically, the attack was designed by the Axis powers to keep America out of the war and damage their naval supply lines to the UK. It caused the exact opposite effect. On December 8th, just a day after the attack, America declared war on Japan and found itself engaged in both the Pacific and Atlantic theater of war. To engage Japan directly, they had the task of crossing the entire Pacific Ocean and deployed a strategy to deal with this problem. Though the plan had been birthed before World War II, U.S. General Douglas MacArthur employed an island-hopping strategy. This meant taking U.S. forces to islands across the Pacific Ocean, destroying Japanese supply lines, ward off an advance towards America whilst leapfrogging closer and closer to the Japanese mainland. With Iwo Jima claimed, both Okinawa and the Japanese mainland would be closer to the U.S. Navy and Marines than ever before. In their first invasion of a Japanese home island, the U.S. Navy and Marines were met with a fortified and prepared Japanese defense force. An American victory, outnumbering the Japanese troops 3-1, was the expected outcome, and the planners expected a swift and easy operation. However, Operation Detachment planners had not foreseen the level of preparation behind the defense of Japanese territory. The U.S. Marines landed amphibiously at the beaches of Iwo Jima on the 19th of February 1945. Only to find 15-foot volcanic ash mounds blocking any chance of building foxholes or steady footing for advance. After an hour of landing and mounting equipment, struggling with terrain on the beaches, the Japanese unleashed a storm of mortar, artillery, and machine gun fire on the beach. The result of this is best typified by the 25 Marines 3rd Battalion, an 83.3% casualty rate. 900 Marines landed that morning. By the evening, only 150 were left in the fight. The most enduring image of the Battle of Iwo Jima is Rosenthal's photo of 6 U.S. Marines planting the American flag at the top of Mount Suribachi. So powerful was the image, not only did it win the Pulitzer Prize for photography, it was modeled for the Marine Corps' memorial in 1954. The iconic image hit mass print across publications within 17 hours of it being taken. The capture of soldiers struggling but succeeding, of giving their all for the cause of the country, was the very patriotism Allied powers counted on. However, it could be argued that propaganda has not been allowed to get in the way of a good story. Rosenthal's photo, while iconic, poetic, beautiful even for some, was an interesting rewrite of reality. A flag was raised by U.S. Marines at the top of Mount Suribachi on February 23, 1945, but the photo is close to a retake of the actual event. An initial flag had been raised, but Rosenthal had captured the planting of a second replacement flag. More importantly, unlike its victorious imagery implies, the bloody and high-casualty battle was over a month away from ending. Capturing Mount Suribachi was a fine claim for Marines at the island's south end. Though tellingly, of the 6 Marines captured in this Hall of Fame image, only 3 would survive the deadly battle. In the days that followed the landing on Iwo Jima, both U.S. forces and Japanese forces began to learn one another's tactics. The Americans learned the hard way that the Japanese army had secured a network of hidden positions and bunkers connected to no less than 18 kilometers of underground tunnels. Any hidden pillboxes or bunkers cleared by the Americans would soon be refilled with Japanese soldiers. Many Marines were killed passing bunkers they presumed were empty. So ferocious were the Japanese defenders, the Marines soon learned that the only methods that would clear their positions were grenades and flamethrowers. 8 Sherman tanks equipped with flamethrowers were deployed at Iwo Jima, using up to 38,000 liters of fuel per day, and were the single most important weapon for U.S. forces. Marines were clear. It was the only weapon the Japanese army feared. Despite the rumors that Iwo Jima was awarded the most medals of honor ever awarded in history, this isn't the case. However, the sheer bravery and incredible sacrifice of the recipients are reflected in further numbers. Iwo Jima had 27 Medal of Honor recipients, with over half of these being posthumously awarded. All of the recipients came from a range of ranks, from hospital corpsmen to Marines, a display of the brutality and impossible odds they fought. Of all the Medals of Honor given to the U.S. Marines during the entirety of World War II, over a quarter came from Iwo Jima alone. A rarely told chapter of the Battle of Iwo Jima was the indispensable participation of Native American Navajo tribe members. Not publicly disclosed until 1968, the U.S. Marines were in desperate need to find communication for the Pacific Theater that could not be intercepted by the Japanese, selecting 29 Navajo men for the task, who went on to create a word association code in their Navajo language. Even those who understood Navajo would be mystified by the cleverly constructed code. Under their original system, radio communications that could last as long as 30 minutes were reduced to 3 lines in 20 seconds. During the Battle of Iwo Jima, 6 Navajo talkers delivered over 800 messages without interception or error. The code remained unbroken until the war ended, and U.S. Marine higher-ups stated that Iwo Jima could not have been won without the Navajo men and their brilliant code. Reaching the north of the island, the U.S. forces faced fortifications greater than they'd found in the south, and even rockier terrain. The U.S. Marines were left to secure Hill 382 and Hill 362, in an area so heavily defended, it was monikered the Meat Grinder. Days were filled with high American casualties as entire units and tanks were laid waste with machine gun fire and tanks dismantled with mines. The breakthrough came from the aforementioned learning of tactics. The Japanese had learned the American pattern of bombardment followed by an infantry assault. So, they mixed up the playbook. The 9th Marine Regiment was ordered to attack at night with no prior artillery launch, and the Marines captured the hills. So significant was Hill 362 that it inspired a 1,000-man banzai countercharge to recapture Mount Suribachi for the Japanese. As the U.S. forces continued a bloody and permanently costly advance, the Japanese kept counterattacking. Having destroyed the central Japanese command post on the 24th of March, the Japanese launched their final 300-man attack that following night. Rumor has it, Lieutenant General Kuribayashi led the charge, the leader of this iron-like Japanese defense deployment. On March 26, 1945, the island had been claimed and officially secured. Though the costs were extraordinarily high for the U.S. victors, and some 1,600 Japanese soldiers remained in tunnels, defending the island till their death over the next 3 months. To this day, the necessity of the battle for Iwo Jima has been brought into question and under dispute. The strategic plan of island hopping was based on the premise each island U.S. forces gained had taken a route of advance away from the Japanese and furthered their own. However, Iwo Jima was entirely debatable on this premise, particularly with the remarkably high human cost. In just 36 days, the battle killed around 20,000 Japanese troops and left the U.S. Marines with an even higher number of casualties. Retired Chief of Naval Operations William V. Pratt publicly criticized the move, stating that the island was useless to both the Navy and the Army as a formative base. Controversially, the official justification for claiming the island was it providing a landing site for fighter escorts. However, long-range fighter escort runs were highly impractical and only attempted 10 times. Following its capture by U.S. forces, Iwo Jima was primarily used for aircraft refueling, technical checks, and infrequent air-sea rescue. Iwo Jima was far from the only island that could have been used for this. Perhaps most controversial of all, the Marines who fought in this bloody battle did not have their perspective considered before the operation. The fierce, violent nature of Iwo Jima was symbolic of the Senjikun military code of the Imperial Japanese forces. The Senjikun provided the backbone for a military that simply knew no surrender. It strictly forbade it. Retreat was also expressly forbidden, along with the mantra, "Never live to experience shame as a prisoner." This military code was recipe for some of the highest mortality rates seen across the Pacific. In practical terms, it meant Japanese soldiers would take their own life before accepting any kind of defeat. Each Japanese soldier was equipped with 2 grenades, one for the enemy and one for suicide. Kamikaze attacks were normalized under this code, and conversely, surrender and capture rates for Japanese personnel were minimal. Yet the bloodshed, the exorbitant bloodshed, has the handprints of the Senjikun all over it. Of the 21,000 Japanese troops on Iwo Jima, nearly 20,000 were killed. They were fighting to the death. Though most tellingly, the casualty rate of US Marines was higher than the Japanese death rate. Notably, Japanese forces were demanded to take 10 American lives or regard themselves as dishonorable failures. The deadliest of battles could only be expected. Iwo Jima may well be the clearest example of the romance and waste of war in one battle. The US Marines' legacy was assured thanks to the extraordinarily high losses suffered in victory. Yet it was all for a seemingly unnecessary airfield. The Japanese army literally fought to their death, displaying absolutist no surrender. But what did it get them? A heavier bombardment of Okinawa and the dropping of atomic bombs instead of an invasion of their homeland. These bravest souls who fought in Iwo Jima should never be forgotten, though I can't help but feel they deserved better. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.